Hey guys, today we're going to start taking a look at our next transformation, which is called a reflection. And there are two types of reflections or flips. Remember, we also call these flips. We can either flip across the x-axis, which means we'll flip top down or from the bottom up, or we can flip across what's called the y-axis. And that means we'll flip left to right or vice versa. So I want you to see how this will actually look when we do it. So remember last time when we were doing translations, if you translate all the points, you translate the whole picture. So that's how it works with reflections as well. So first, I notice it says we're going to reflect across the x-axis. That's this axis right here. So the way I physically do that is I just count. Like, let's look at A. I notice that it's up 1, 2, 3 from the x-axis, so I'm going to go down 3. 1, 2, 3. So that's my A prime. Remember, that's my image or my new picture. Let's do the same thing for D. D is up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to go straight down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's D prime. I'm going to connect these as I go so I don't get lost. Let's look at M. M is up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's going to be my M prime. And W is up 1, 2, 3, 4. So I go down 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and that's going to be W prime. And so let's take a look at the type of questions that you'll actually see with this work. So let's do another reflection across the x-axis. First, here's your x-axis. So I'm going to count up or down, okay, since I'm moving things across the x-axis. So let's start with D. Right now, D is down 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to flip it up 1, 2, 3. So that's D prime. Now, I'm going to keep going on this one. I'll show you something in the next one. J is down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's make it go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just counting. That's all I'm doing. That's how I flip these. And now let's do R, which is down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's my R prime, or my new image. Now, I could have done all that like I did and flipped the entire thing, but look at the question. It says, what will be the coordinates of J prime? So that means this, J prime, that's really all I had to do. But now that I'm going to read the coordinates, remember we start at 0, 0. So I go to the right, 1, 2, 3, comma, and I go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my coordinates for J prime are 3, 5. Now let's take a look at the next example. Now it says to reflect across the y-axis. We've not done one of those yet. So that means we're going to flip left to right. But here's what I want you to do. I believe in working smarter. I want us to work hard, but work smarter first. So it says, what will be the coordinates of N prime? So guess what? I'm only going to flip N. So remember, flipping across the y-axis means you go from left to right or right to left, wherever it starts. So N is left 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to go right 1, 2, 3. So that's going to be my N prime. So now I want to read those coordinates. Remember, we start at 0, 0. So I go right 1, 2, 3, up 1, 2. So my coordinates for N prime is 3, 2. I'm going to go ahead and flip this so you can see what it looks like. So B was left 1, so I'm going to go right 1 for my B prime. Remember, we connected as we go. And X was to the right 2, so I'm going to make it go to the left 2. That's my X prime. So there is my figure reflected across the y-axis. Now let's take a look at the next couple of examples. Notice they only give us the coordinates. So let's look, if you'll remember in the last lesson, we had algebraic rules that we could use for these. Well, let's talk about these. The first one says to reflect across the x-axis. Let me make that a little bigger. So the rule for that, make sure you write this in your notes, is go from the original xy to leave x alone, change the sign of the y. So one more time, go from your original point, leave the x alone, and change the sign of the y value or the y coordinate. So the question says, what are the coordinates for the image vertices? So that means we need to do all of these. So if I'm reflecting across the x-axis, this becomes 1. The rule says change the sign of the y. Remember, this is xy, so that's a positive 1. Now let's do n prime. Leave the x alone. That's the x, that's the y. Change the sign of the y. Well, if it's 0, we just leave it at 0. And now let's find q prime. Leave the x alone. Change the sign of the y. So a -4 becomes a +4. So those are all my coordinates for my image vertices. Now let's take a look at reflecting across the y-axis. Here's your rule for that. And again, write it down. You're going to need it. You're going to need it through the lesson. So we go from the original xy to, now we change the sign of the x coordinate and leave the y alone. So one more time, that means change the sign of the x and leave the y alone. That's what we do when we reflect across the the y-axis. So then it says, what will the coordinates of x prime be? So guess what? I only need to do that for x. So x prime, change the signs of x. Remember, this is xy. What's the opposite of -4? You make it a +4, and then leave the y alone. So that's how you would answer your questions if it only asks for one set of coordinates. Let's practice these real quick though. So to find k prime, change x, so it becomes 4, leave the y alone. We've already done x prime. M prime, change the sign of x, 0 is always 0, leave the y alone. B prime, change the sign of x, leave the y alone. Okay? And now let's take a look at how do we determine or describe a that should be a reflection. How do we describe the reflection using words? Well, we decide what it flipped across. Remember, the plain old letters are your starting pre-image, so it goes from the bottom to the top, so it reflects across the x-axis. If it goes top to bottom, it reflects across the x-axis. And I like these rules because it's exactly the same every time we flip across the x-axis. The original goes to, and notice I'm looking back at my notes to get that rule. Leave the x alone, change the sign of the y. Now let's look at the next example. Well, when I look at that, here's the pre-image, because those are just plain old letters, and this is the new image. So it looks to me like it flipped from the right side to the left side, so it flipped across the y-axis. So this reflects across the y-axis. And again, it says, oh, I did it again. Describe the reflection using words. So it reflects across the y-axis. Writing the algebraic rule, guess what? I'm going to go up here and look. So it goes from xy to, and here's my rule for flipping across or reflecting across the y-axis. Change the sign of the x keep the Y. So be sure to use these notes to help you with your practice and your quiz, and I'll talk to you guys soon.